We have some big name running backs rolling on and off of injury lists, and that makes seeing how everybody stacks up just a little more complex. Let's dive in. Here are your Week 6 running back rankings. As you see on the bottom, on our injury list, it's Jahmyr Gibbs, James Conner, and Javonte Williams, just waiting a little longer for information on them. Christian McCaffrey now has a touchdown in 11 straight games and did about all he could against a tough Dallas defensive front. When you have somebody who, at this point, is pretty much a guaranteed touchdown scorer, I'm not pulling him off the top. Now, his life isn't going to get any easier this week, considering he is facing off against a Browns defense allowing just 3.2 yards per carry. But CMC leads the league in rushing attempts, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, and of course, he is the RB1 overall in standard PPR. This team runs the ball more often than anybody else at 55%, and that does make a lot of sense considering they are undefeated and chew the clock in the final minutes a ton. Deebo Samuel has been bruised up in the last couple of weeks, which is all the more motivation for Brock Purdy to use his versatile running back in the passing game. Bijan Robinson found the end zone for the second time this year in an ugly win for Atlanta over Houston last week. He saw a season-low 61% of snaps, and he was held to just 3.3 yards per carry. He actually looked human. That stingy Texans defense allows just 3.9 yards per carry, so that checks out. But because of his pass-catching involvement, he found the end zone and managed to put up 13.8 points in standard PPR. He has broke free for 10 plays of 10 or more yards. He will take on a Washington team that struggled mightily last week and allowed 40 points to the Chicago Bears. There is something to be said about that. Not only are they allowing 4.8 yards per carry, the 5th highest rate in the league, but the Falcons are 2.5-point favorites. If they can pull and stay ahead, look for plenty of touches down the stretch for Robinson. Early reports indicate that Austin Ekeler should be back in this matchup against the Cowboys, so we're basing this ranking obviously assuming that is the case. I'm slotting him right up here at number 3 overall, mainly based on his receiving upside. Ekeler led all NFL running backs with 107 receptions last year, and he cleared 25 fantasy points on 20 touches in week 1 against Miami. Then he was out, especially in an offense that runs a lot of plays. We're talking 67 per game, and that is the 6th highest rate in the league, folks. This guy is going to get his opportunities. Ekeler has historically had to account for a bulk of the Chargers offense due to injuries of the talent around him, and again, we have a team that is now missing Mike Williams. So once again, here's more opportunity. In terms of a snap count, you know my rule. Look out for one. If there is a report on Ekeler getting a snap count, drop him down at least a ranking and ask any questions you have from there. Tony Pollard did not have the most glorious game last week, but again, let's consider that opposition. Let's consider the fact he played up against a San Francisco 49ers team, allowing just over 13 points per contest. Dallas also got crushed. So Pollard had a season-low 10 touches on the day. San Francisco is literally this Dallas team's kryptonite from the look of it, so Pollard essentially got phased out of the game from the start. It's a complete 180 now. He goes from facing a defensive juggernaut to going up against a Chargers team, allowing the 6th most amount of fantasy points to the position. The Chargers allow 4.1 yards per carry, middle of the pack in that ranking. The Cowboys are favored by 2 points in LA, and Pollard averages over 20 touches per game when Dallas wins. Look for a bounce-back performance or at least a competitive ball game, considering the last 2 have been blowouts where Pollard plays a larger role in this offensive game plan. David Montgomery has been a runaway freight train, and we've seen him on full display as of late due to the lack of usage and eventual injury of Jahmyr Gibbs. The man has a league-leading 12 broken tackles, and we're seeing him get fed a metric ton of volume relative to the rest of the league. His 88 rush attempts through the 4 games he has played is the 4th highest mark in the NFL. I've said this before, but he is literally the 2023 version of Jamal Williams from last year, and he just happens to be on the Lions. He is 3rd in the NFL behind just CMC and Tony Pollard in red zone rushes with 25 of them, and he has 6 touchdowns in 4 games. Montgomery has also scored in every game he's played in so far this year. The Lions are 3-point favorites over the Buccaneers this week, and with Detroit not only being favorites but committing to the run 50% of the time, let's sit back and watch Monty cook. Travis Etienne put up a career performance last week against a Bills defense that has struggled a ton against the run, and that is an understatement at the very least. The third-year back had a season-high 30 touches and broke free for greater than 35 fantasy points in a PPR format. This Jaguars team, especially last week, looks to be back on track in terms of their offensive firepower. The better that offense performs as a whole, the better news it is for you Travis Etienne owners, because now you've got distractions for opposing defenses in the forms of Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram. You get the point. Outside of that, Etienne is quietly one of the toughest runners to bring down. He's 2nd in the NFL in broken tackles so far, and he has also had 5 targets in 3 of his first 5 games this year. With Devon Achane being out for what looks like at least a couple of weeks, the window of opportunity has opened right back up for Raheem Mostert. It wasn't too long ago that Mostert was making a case to be a top 3 fantasy running back, and then the volume competition took over, and we learned that Achane has an otherworldly combination of speed and vision. Mostert is averaging an impressive 5.4 yards per carry. Miami, that offense is averaging over 500 yards per game, which at this point, I mean, we're a fourth of the way through the season. That's absurd, okay? The aspect to watch out for with Mostert is still volume competition. He has only cleared 15 carries in a game once this season. All things considered, the Panthers are allowing the 7th most amount of rushing yards per game at over 140, and the 2nd most amount of fantasy points to the position as well. Alvin Kamara is back and doing everything we were hoping for, at least through the first pair of weeks. With 49 total touches in 2 games, Derek Carr and the Saints have wasted no time in getting Kamara involved. In both a win and a loss, this guy has been utilized to the max. I see no signs of him easing back, considering he was in for 75% of snaps a couple of weeks ago and 63% of snaps this past week, even in a blowout. Kendre Miller was in for 36% of snaps against New England, but it had no impact on Kamara considering the damage was done in that blowout victory by the time Miller actually started getting a decent amount of usage. Kenneth Walker III is up next coming off of a bye, has fresh legs, and has been pretty consistent with what he did last year outside of the fact that he is pacing for far more touchdowns, which is phenomenal news. Despite missing that bye week already, Walker is 4th in the NFL among backs in red zone rushes with 18 of them. Zach Charbonnet, at least for now, is not playing nearly the role some people seem to be implying, considering the Seahawks grabbed a running back so early in the draft. Much like last year, and again, it is early, Walker III is a better standard and half PPR play, considering he's averaging hardly over 2 targets per game. But in general, he draws a great matchup this week. Cincinnati, his opposition, allows 5.3 yards per carry. Isaiah Pacheco has taken on a greater role than some may have anticipated in 2023, but with the Chiefs lacking a true wide receiver one, unless you want to count Travis Kelce, they have leaned on the run more. This Kansas City team threw the ball over 61% of the time last year. That mark is now down to 58% in 2023. Pacheco is seeing over 14 rushes per game, and after having just 14 targets all season in 2022, he's at 13 targets through 5 games so far, so much more involved in the pass. This guy is becoming a much more viable option in PPR leagues. The Chiefs are balancing their offense more, with the Chiefs being huge 10.5-point favorites, and Denver allowing a league-high 188 rushing yards per game. Enjoy this one, folks. Joe Mixon is up next. He's in an offense that finally looks like itself again. After 4 weeks of bruised up, subpar play, we were getting a little worried, folks, but just like with Jamar Chase, we're chilling now. Mixon is one of the few running backs in the league at the moment who can truly say he has the backfield to himself. In Cincy's 34-20 win over the Arizona Cardinals, Mixon had 25 of the team's 30 rushes, over 80%. And once again, we're seeing a continuation from last year in that he's getting more and more involved as a pass catcher. We've got 4 receptions from him in this last matchup. He's 9th among running backs in total yards after contact. And especially with T. Higgins going down, this offense was able to successfully rely on Joe Mixon. Jarran Reed, the nose tackle for Seattle, is currently questionable. We'll have to monitor that and see if it has any type of an impact on a defense, allowing a league-low 3.2 yards per carry. On the other end of the volume spectrum, DeAndre Swift has been seeing plenty of touches. Other than the unfortunate reality that pretty much anytime the ball is on the 1-yard line, the Eagles are tush-pushing Jalen Hurts over the line, Swift has been putting up pleasing results. He has accounted for 53% of the team's rushing yards and 42% of the team's rushes as a whole, but for somebody who has averaged around 5 to 6 targets per game in his career, he just has 17 of them through 5 games in 2023. That's what will happen on a run-heavy team. Pass-heavy squads like the Chargers are much more likely to utilize their backs out in the pass, aka Austin Eckler. So just keep in mind that Swift's standard and half PPR ranking is a bit higher than I have him for PPR. Saquon Barkley sits right smack dab in the middle here, assuming he plays, because we know this is more of a nagging injury. I somewhat used my applied rule of dropping people down a tier when you assume they're on a snap count or aren't even at 100%. We will have to keep an eye out for those reports, of course. In the 2 games Barkley has played, he has relied on pass-catching involvement to be effective. Should he play a significant role in this game, it would be against a Bills team allowing 5.8 yards per carry, the 2nd highest mark in the league. There are holes in that front 7, and anytime a generational talent like Barkley is on the field, you've got to expect him to make an impact for sure, not to mention the Giants are starving for some type of offensive contribution. If he ends up being out and you're riding the Matt Breida train, please ask questions related to where he would fit into your lineups. Out of the top 10 running backs in fantasy PPR right now, Kyren Williams is technically the 2nd least efficient out of the group, averaging just 3.9 yards per carry. With Cam Akers gone, Williams is very clearly one of the more decisive running back 1 options in the league, considering that Ronnie Rivers is averaging a mere 2 carries per contest. The part that worries me about Williams, though, is while he is getting a ton of volume, his fantasy production is very touchdown reliant. He immediately saw season-low 2 targets with Cooper Kupp back. People think Kupp being back will hurt Puka Nakua's production. No, it's not going to hurt it as much as these tertiary options like Kyren Williams, like Tyler Higbee, who saw some dump-off passes come their way early because Kupp was gone. Now, Josh Jacobs is the most inefficient running back out of the top 10 in fantasy. He's averaging a horrific 2.9 yards per carry. Jacobs is now up to 1.9 yards per carry before contact, which is improvement based on the metrics before, but it still isn't great. The offensive line is abysmal, but the fact he's even that high is for a different reason than Williams. Josh Jacobs leads all running backs in targets by 5 at the moment. After having a career-high 64 targets in each of the last 2 seasons, Jacobs is on pace for 82 of them under the new QB in Jimmy Garoppolo, who apparently likes checkdowns. He's the clear-cut third option behind Davante Adams and Jacoby Myers, as indicated by the 20-target drop-off between Jacobs and the next most frequently used option in Amir Abdullah. He has just 10 targets. Despite the efficiency issues, I think having a running back averaging 6 targets a game is a safe bet for the time being. Week 5 was the first time that we saw Breece Hall without limitations this year, and it was every bit of what we could have hoped for. He snapped for 194 yards from scrimmage, ran for over 8 yards per carry, and just obliterated the Broncos defense, as pretty much everyone's doing right now. In the limited time Hall has played so far now, he is second in the NFL among backs with 12 rushes for at least 20 yards. We saw a disparity in efficiency between Dalvin Cook and Breece Hall heading into the week, and that continued even with the usage situation swapped. Hall would be a lot higher on this list after a performance like that, but he has quite the tall task to face this week. He's facing an Eagles team that allows just 3.4 yards per carry, one of the lowest rates in the league. The Jets are 6.5-point underdogs to the Eagles, warranting what is likely to be a more pass-heavy scheme if the game gets out of hand. And with the way the Eagles play football, they are set to chew up a lot of clock, considering they run the ball more often than all but 2 teams in the NFL. James Cook had a very forgettable performance last week against the Chargers. 5 rushes for -4 yards and only 9 touches is a pretty gross stat line, I will be honest. Latavius Murray and Damian Harris didn't get all that involved either, considering the Bills ran the ball just 14 times in total and couldn't get anything going against Jacksonville. On the bright side, Cook is still averaging 5 yards per carry on the season, still showed no signs of losing usage as the lead back, and he has hung in tough. With 2.3 yards after contact per attempt, Cook is 14th among the league's rankings in that category, and now the Bills take on the Giants in a matchup where they are 14.5-point favorites. That's the largest spread I've seen this year. I don't know about you. If all goes to plan, Cook should be in line for a healthy amount of volume once again. Derrick Henry is slowly regressing. We haven't exactly been subtle about hinting what that means fantasy football-wise. He was in a sells video last week. Tyjae Spears was in a buys video for this week in week 6. But as of right now, Derrick Henry is still clearly the guy in Tennessee. We saw a flash of prime Henry in week 4 against the Bengals, and he has been in for over 55% of snaps in 3 of the last 4 weeks. The issue just is, and always has been, that we are volume and touchdown reliant with Henry, and he hasn't been excelling in those 2 categories as much so far. This guy does not run routes, at least not at the moment. The 9 receptions in 5 contests, which is far less than what we've seen from Tyjae Spears and in less snaps, shows exactly what Henry's role is. He's a ground and pound guy, traditional running back, about to be 30 years old. Alexander Mattison comes up next despite brewing concerns that Cam Akers is playing a larger role than Ty Chandler was to start the 2023 campaign. Akers was only in for 29% of snaps for the 2nd week in a row, but Mattison had just 10 touches while Akers had 7. Both guys hung around 3 yards per carry, so not too much of a difference there against the Chiefs. The Vikings are already a throw-heavy team, but they took that to the next level with 47 passes to just 18 rushes in their close loss last week. I do think Mattison has a productive day against Chicago. Not only do the Bears allow the 3rd most amount of fantasy points to running backs at the moment, but Minnesota is now without the best receiver in the league for at least 4 weeks in Justin Jefferson. And on top of all of that, the Vikings are favored by a field goal in this game. It's also getting cooler out, and the game is outdoors in the Windy City. These are all ingredients for a more balanced, run-oriented offense in this matchup. Brian Robinson Jr. comes in at number 20 after a game that A, nobody expected, and B, had him removed from the game plan, considering the Bears won by a pretty lengthy margin. Robinson is 6th in the NFL in rushing touchdowns in the red zone, and he has 15 touches inside of the 20 as well. This won't be the easiest matchup in the world against the Falcons front 7 that is led by Calais Campbell and is allowing just 3.8 yards per carry. But Robinson should at least see some more touches. He's averaging 10 touches per contest in the pair of blowouts this team has been on the wrong end of, considering that the opposing Atlanta offense is averaging just 16.6 points per game, the 5th lowest mark in the league. I don't see a blowout scenario being in the cards. Rachaad White is up next, and he hasn't been the most exciting of options at the running back position. In 4 tries, White has only had 1 game where he has registered 4 yards per carry. Lucky for White, he has 2 factors on his side. For one, the Buccaneers are much more run-focused this season. They threw the ball more often than anybody else in the league last year at 66%. That mark is way down to 53%. The second factor is that he doesn't have much volume competition. He has seen 63 of the team's 117 rushes so far, and while 3.3 yards per carry is not glorious by any means, Sean Tucker has been worse. The story is the same with Keyshawn Vaughn, and Chase Edmonds has touched the ball 4 times, so really not too worried. His opposition in Detroit this week only allows 3.3 yards per carry, but with his volume situation that I just ran through, he still makes this list. Jonathan Taylor came back last week, but Zach Moss doesn't seem ready to give up his workload quite yet. Moss broke free and logged over 100 rushing yards for the second time in the last 3 weeks, and even without much volume through the air, it's tough to deny somebody who is averaging 5 yards per carry after 89 carries. And oh yeah, those 89 carries put him at 3rd in the league, and as mentioned in our Week 6 buys video, Jonathan Taylor won't fully be back for at least a couple more weeks. The Colts are looking to ease him back into this role, and after seeing Taylor get just 15% of snaps, it's safe to say we'll be waiting for that quite a bit. I'm a believer in Moss here in Week 6. Jaleel McLaughlin has burst onto the scene in the last couple of weeks as a versatile asset on a struggling Broncos team. Now Javonte Williams, the planned leader of this backfield, has his status up in the air. This pick is operating on the assumption that he doesn't go in a short week, but if he does, we will unfortunately have to yank McLaughlin off this list until we see how compatible the two are in the game together. However, McLaughlin has been doing more with less over the course of the last 2 games. The NCAA career rushing yards record holder at 8,144 yards on the ground has been in for just 33% of snaps in the last pair of games. Yet he has put up fantasy performances of 19 points and 15 points in a standard PPR format, I will repeat, when he's in for a third of the snaps. He faces a Chiefs defense that has held up pretty effectively so far this season. They are allowing 4.3 yards per carry, among the bottom half in the league. Ramondre Stevenson has been dealt a pretty poor hand so far. Now, Stevenson hasn't been a serviceable running back, and he hasn't been doing himself any favors. He is one of the many flaws on that offense, and one of the few players on this list who is actually averaging less than 3 yards per carry right now. But when a team gets outscored 72-3 over the course of 2 games, there's not going to be that great of a prioritization on the run. The Patriots have been in go mode, trying to pass themselves back into games, and clearly that has not gone well. Ezekiel Elliott and Ramondre Stevenson split carries right down the middle at 8 apiece in this last game. Stevenson has been on the field for at least half of the snaps for every game this season, so I guess that's the good news. We just need a competitive ball game in order for somebody who had almost 90 targets last year to operate at his full capacity. Dameon Pierce rounds it out for us at number 25, and it's mainly because the Texans have been feeding him more than most running backs in this tier have been fed on the ground. We've said this before, but Pierce is a much better standard and half PPR pick considering he averaged hardly 2 targets per game. He has at least 15 touches in each of the last 4 contests and at least 20 touches in back-to-back games now. In terms of volume competition, Pierce is holding better than a 3-to-1 ratio over Devin Singletary, who is averaging just 3.5 yards per carry, so not much better. The Texans are 2.5-point underdogs, and if Houston gets behind, they may go throw heavy. We need Pierce to get his points early and often here, while the Texans have surefire control over the tempo of this game with the New Orleans Saints. Fringe players that just missed the top 25, Jonathan Taylor, Miles Sanders, Gus Edwards, Jerome Ford, and Tyjae Spears. Thank you so much for watching. As always, feel free to ask any fantasy football related questions you may have in the comment section below. Be sure to like and subscribe if we are helping you out in fantasy as we head into week 6, and we will see you in the next video.